By 1955, Titan's chainsaws were outselling McCulloch in 17 western states. 6 years later, the company didn't just fail, it vanished so completely that retired loggers still argue about whether it ever existed. The patents are real, sitting in a Los Angeles County archive filed between 1947 and 1958. The factory photographs exist, 23,000 square feet in Glendale, California, assembly lines running 2 shifts. And the saws themselves still turn up, rusted, anonymous, stripped of badges. Usually at estate sales in Oregon and Northern California, sold by grandchildren who don't recognize the manufacturer's mark stamped into the clutch cover. But no one, not Steel, not Husqvarna, not even the logging museums, mentions Titan in their official histories. And there are 3 questions that nobody in this industry wants to answer. What did Titan actually build that made the entire industry need to forget them? Why did a company outselling McCulloch collapse in less than 18 months? And by the time Titan released their first production model, Keller had already made the decision that would eventually destroy him. Keller wasn't an engineer, he was a machinist. 3rd-generation tradesman out of Oakland, drafted into the Seabees in 1943. Naval construction battalions, the men who built airstrips on volcanic islands while the shooting was still happening offshore. Keller's battalion landed on Tinian in July of 1944. The island needed runways, immediately. But Tinian was jungle, dense, volcanic, hostile. They needed to clear thousands of acres in weeks. That's when the crates arrived from Hawaii, unmarked, stenciled only with a requisition number that didn't correspond to any equipment manual Keller had ever seen. Inside were chainsaws, but not like the logging saws back in the States. These were small, 30 pounds, maybe less, single operator, air-cooled 2-stroke engines with magnesium castings and a direct drive chain system. Keller described the sound once, years later, to a reporter from a Glendale newspaper. He said it was like a dentist's drill magnified through a church bell. High-pitched, relentless, and wrong. The kind of mechanical noise that made men instinctively step back the first time they heard it. But they worked. A single Seabee with one of those saws could drop a hardwood tree in under 3 minutes. The Navy never acknowledged building them. After the war, when Keller filed a Freedom of Information request for the technical schematics, he was told no such equipment had ever been issued to construction battalions in the Pacific Theater. But Keller had kept something, a single component, a part so small that no one noticed when he slipped it into his duffel during demobilization. It was a clutch assembly, centrifugal, spring-loaded, weighing less than 8 ounces. In every chainsaw in production in 1946, McCulloch, Maul, Diston, the chain ran whenever the engine ran, constant tension. You fired the engine and the chain was already moving. There was no idle, no safe mode. Keller's clutch changed that. When the engine idled, the clutch disengaged, the chain stopped. When the operator squeezed the throttle, centrifugal force engaged the drum, and the chain ran. Let off the throttle, chain stops. Simple, elegant, and the idea that would make him and ultimately break him. He built the first prototype in a garage in Glendale that still smelled like the previous tenant's lever tannery, rancid hide and cutting oil. Keller worked 3rd shift at Lockheed, building wing spars for the Constellation, and came home at midnight to machine parts on a lathe he bought at a Navy surplus auction. His wife, Margaret, said she would wake up at 2, 3 in the morning to the sound of the grinder and the smell of oil, and Keller in the side yard pulling a starter cord over and over, the engine coughing and dying and coughing again. By May of 1947, he had a working saw, 28 pounds, magnesium and aluminum, automatic centrifugal clutch, 16-inch bar, and a fuel efficiency no one in the industry thought was possible. Keller's carburetor sipped gas at half the rate of a McCulloch. He called it the Titan Mark I. When he demonstrated it to a veteran logging crew outside Eureka in June of 1947, the crew foreman bought 6 saws on the spot, with cash, out of his own pocket, and told Keller if he didn't go into production immediately, someone else would steal his design within the year. The foreman was right, but the theft wouldn't come from another manufacturer. Keller incorporated Titan Tool and Manufacturing in August of 1947, raised $40,000, and hired 14 men, all machinists, all veterans. By March of 1948, they were manufacturing 112 saws a month, with a backlog of orders stretching into July. The saws sold themselves, lighter than anything on the market, more efficient, safer, and cheaper. Keller priced the Mark I at $187. A comparable McCulloch cost $265. But it wasn't the price that made loggers loyal to Titan. It was the sound. Every chainsaw has a voice. Operators know this. A McCulloch had a deep, rattling growl. A maul sounded harsh, brutally mechanical. But a Titan sang, higher pitched than the others, but smoother, less vibration. Men reported running a Titan for 6-7 hours without the hand-numbing fatigue that came with other saws. In logging camps across Oregon and Northern California, Titan became the saw you wanted. Not the saw you settled for, the saw you wanted. By 1950, Titan was selling 400 saws a month. By 1953, they'd opened a second production line and hired 62 employees. Trade publications called them the upstart that refuses to stay small. And that's when McCulloch's legal team made contact. The first letter arrived in November of 1953. Polite, formal. It didn't mention the clutch directly. It simply invited Keller to discuss matters of shared technical interest in the development of modern portable power equipment. Keller ignored it. The second letter arrived in January of 1954, less polite. It referenced a McCulloch patent from 1946 covering centrifugal clutch assemblies for chain-driven cutting devices. The letter noted that Titan's clutch bore substantial similarities and suggested that further manufacturing without a licensing agreement might result in unfortunate misunderstandings. Keller's lawyer reviewed the patent. His assessment was blunt. The patent was broad, vaguely worded, and potentially unenforceable. But a lawsuit, even a losing lawsuit, would cost Titan more than the company had in liquid capital. Keller filed a counter-patent in March. Different enough, his lawyer said, to establish independent invention. McCulloch didn't sue. They did something worse. They hired Titan's 3 best machinists, doubled their salaries, offered relocation packages. By June of 1954, Keller had lost his lead engineer, his production floor supervisor, and the man who designed Titan's carburetor system. Then McCulloch released the 150, a new chainsaw, lightweight, efficient, featuring, according to the press release, an advanced automatic clutch system for improved safety and operator ease. It was Keller's clutch, with 2 minor modifications that made it just different enough to avoid the patent. Keller could have fought, filed suit. His lawyer told him he had a good case, but Keller didn't sue. Instead, he went smaller. The Mark I was a professional saw, built for loggers, built for all-day use in brutal conditions. But Keller saw something no one else in the industry was paying attention to. The suburban homeowner, the post-war housing boom. Tract homes in California and Arizona and Nevada, half-acre lots with trees that needed trimming, firewood that needed cutting. Men who didn't want a 90-pound professional saw. They wanted something they could lift with one hand and store in a garage. Keller designed the Titan Scout in 8 weeks. 18 pounds, 10-inch bar, bright yellow housing. It wasn't built for professionals. It was built for dentists and accountants and insurance salesmen who wanted to cut their own firewood on Saturday mornings. And it sold like nothing Titan had ever produced. By the end of 1955, the Scout outsold the Mark I by 3-1. Titan opened a 3rd production line, hired another 40 workers. Keller bought a house in Pasadena with a swimming pool, and that's when he made the mistake. He expanded too fast. In early 1956, Keller signed a lease on a second factory in San Bernardino, purchased $50,000 in new equipment, contracted with a national distributor to place Titan saws in hardware stores across the West Coast. The company was operating on credit, on projections, on the assumption that demand would keep growing. It didn't. The housing boom stalled. Interest rates ticked up. Suburban homeowners stopped buying chainsaws. And the Scout, the product that was supposed to carry Titan into the national market, started coming back. Not in small numbers, in alarming numbers. The clutch was failing. Not Keller's original centrifugal design. That was bulletproof. But the springs. To cut costs on the Scout, the production team had switched to a cheaper spring supplier. Thinner gauge wire, lighter tension. The springs wore out, sometimes in a month, sometimes in a week. When they failed, the clutch wouldn't disengage. The chain ran constantly. The saw became dangerous. Stores reported injury complaints, 2 in California, 1 in Nevada. A man in Flagstaff lost 3 fingers when a Scout kicked back during startup. Keller issued a voluntary recall in July of 1956. Every Scout sold in the previous 18 months. He promised free replacements for every defective clutch assembly. It bankrupted him. The recall cost Titan nearly $200,000. The company didn't have it. Keller took out loans, liquidated equipment, stopped paying himself a salary. By October, Titan had burned through its credit, defaulted on the San Bernardino lease, and laid off half its workforce. In December of 1956, Keller sold the Glendale factory and dissolved Titan Tool and Manufacturing. He was 41 years old, but that's not why his family won't say his name. After Titan folded, Keller took a job as a machinist at a tool and die shop in El Monte. Wage work, hourly. He sold the house in Pasadena and moved the family into a 2-bedroom apartment in Alhambra. His daughter later described him as silent during this period. Not angry, not bitter, just absent. He still designed, at night, in the apartment, small engines, carburetors, tool components. He filled notebooks with sketches, and on weekends he'd take the bus to the library and read engineering journals. In 1959, he filed a new patent, a lightweight portable chainsaw with an integrated anti-vibration system and advanced air filtration design. It was brilliant, 15 years ahead of its time, and he sold it, not to McCulloch, to a patent broker in Delaware, a middleman, the kind of firm that bought intellectual property from desperate inventors and resold it to manufacturers who didn't want their names attached to the original transaction. Keller got $1,800. The broker sold the patent 6 months later for an undisclosed sum. Keller's daughter said he came home the night he got the check and sat at the kitchen table without speaking for 2 hours, just sitting, holding the check. Margaret asked him if he was all right, and he said, "I should have fought." He never designed another saw. Now here's the answer to the first question, the one the industry doesn't want examined. Titan didn't just build chainsaws. They built the template, the centrifugal clutch, the lightweight magnesium housing, the high-efficiency carburetor, the consumer-grade homeowner model. Every major chainsaw manufacturer in the world uses some version of Keller's designs today. But none of them credit him, because crediting him would mean acknowledging the patent transfers, the hired-away engineers, the quiet acquisition of intellectual property from a man who had no leverage and no choice. It's not that the industry forgot Titan, it's that they needed to forget Titan, because remembering Titan means remembering how the industry was actually built. Keller worked at the El Monte tool shop until 1977. He retired at 62 with a small pension, moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in Glendora, stopped attending family gatherings. His daughter visited twice a year and said he was polite but distant. He didn't talk about the war. He didn't talk about Titan. He died in 1983 of a heart attack, alone in the apartment. He was 68. At the estate sale, his daughter found a box in the closet. Inside were the original blueprints for the Titan Mark I, the patent certificates, photographs of the factory floor, and a single chainsaw, a Mark I, serial number 14, one of the first production models ever built. It still ran. She tried to donate it to the Smithsonian. They declined. Insufficient historical significance. She tried the logging museums in Oregon and Washington. None responded. She finally sold it at the estate sale for $75 to a man who said he collected old tools. No one knows where it is now, which brings us to the second question. Why did a company outselling McCulloch collapse in less than 18 months? Because Titan operated in the gap between invention and infrastructure. Keller was a genius at design, but he didn't understand distribution. He didn't understand credit cycles. He didn't understand that a recall, even a responsible ethical recall, would be weaponized by competitors who saw weakness and moved. McCulloch didn't destroy Titan with lawyers or patents. They destroyed Titan by waiting. They let Keller overextend, let him expand into markets he couldn't support, let him take on debt he couldn't service. And when the Scout's clutch springs failed, they made sure every hardware store, every distributor, every trade publication heard about it. Titan didn't fail because the saws were bad. Titan failed because Keller believed the market rewarded good engineering. It doesn't. It rewards survival. But there's one part of the story that still doesn't add up, and it's the part Keller's family refuses to discuss. In 1961, 5 years after Titan folded, a man named Robert Voss filed a lawsuit against Raymond Keller in Los Angeles County Superior Court. Voss was the Glendale dentist, the original investor, the man who'd put up $5,000 in seed capital back in 1947. The lawsuit claimed Keller had defrauded him, that Keller had secretly sold Titan's patent portfolio to an unnamed third party in 1957 and pocketed the proceeds without distributing them to shareholders. Keller didn't contest it. He didn't hire a lawyer. He didn't file a response. The court ruled in Voss's favor by default and issued a judgment for $32,000. Keller never paid it. There's no record of what happened to the money. If Keller sold the patents, and the lawsuit strongly suggests he did, that money went somewhere. His daughter said he lived modestly until he died. No savings, no assets, no unexplained wealth. So where did it go? Some people think Keller was cheated, that a patent broker took the money and left him with nothing. Others think he gave it away, paid off old debts, supported employees from Titan who'd been laid off and couldn't find work. But there's a third theory, whispered about in vintage chainsaw collector forums and industrial history threads. Never confirmed, never documented, that Keller didn't sell the patents to McCulloch, that he sold them to Style. Style was a German company. In 1957, they were just beginning to enter the American market. Their saws were heavy, old-fashioned, built for European forestry. They needed to modernize, fast. In 1959, the same year Keller filed his anti-vibration patent, Style released a new saw, the 045, lightweight, magnesium housing, automatic clutch, advanced air filtration. It looked nothing like their previous models. It looked like a Titan. Style has never acknowledged purchasing patents from American inventors in the 1950s. Their corporate history credits internal research and development teams in Germany. But patent transfer records from that era are incomplete, and the timing is hard to ignore. Keller filed the patent in March of 1959. The broker sold it in September. Still released the 45 in November. 6 months from patent to production. That's not development time, that's implementation time. If Keller sold to Still, if he took their money knowing it would never be traced back to him, then the Voss lawsuit makes perfect sense. Voss wasn't suing because Keller stole from him. He was suing because Keller had cut him out of a deal Voss didn't even know existed. And if that's true, then Keller spent the last 20 years of his life not as a failure, but as a man who had quietly, invisibly beaten the system in a way no one would ever be able to prove. Which brings us to the third question, the one his family won't touch. Keller's daughter won't discuss the lawsuit, won't discuss the estate, won't confirm or deny whether her father ever mentioned Stiel or Germany or a second deal made in the dark. But in 2003, a reporter tracked her down and asked her one question. Do you think your father was a good man? She was silent for almost 30 seconds. Then she said, I think my father was tired. And she hung up. There's a photograph, taken sometime in the early 1950s. The Titan factory floor in Glendale. 20, maybe 30 men in work clothes standing in front of assembly benches. In the center of the frame, slightly out of focus, is Raymond Keller. He's not looking at the camera. He's looking down at a chainsaw in his hands. You can't see his face clearly, just his posture. Shoulders slightly hunched, hands gripping the saw like it's the only thing in the world that makes complete sense to him. The photograph was used once, in a 1954 trade magazine article calling Keller a visionary and predicting Titan would be a national brand within 5 years. The magazine went out of business in 1962. And here's the detail that nobody at any of these companies will ever confirm. In 1981, 2 years before he died, Keller received a package. No return address. Postmarked from Stuttgart, Germany. Inside was a single item, a Stihl 045 chainsaw, used, well-maintained, and engraved on the crankcase in small, precise lettering were 2 words, Danke, Raymond, thank you, Raymond. Keller's daughter found it in the closet after he died, still in the original box. He had never started it, never even mounted the bar. She sold it at the estate sale. Same day as the Mark I, $75. The man who bought both saws never came back, didn't leave a name, paid in cash, put both saws in the trunk of a Mercedes sedan with German plates, and drove away. No one has seen either saw since. The Titan name is gone. The factory is gone. The saws are scattered, anonymous, rusting in barns and garages across the West. And Raymond Keller, the man who designed the clutch that every chainsaw in the world still uses, died alone in a 1-bedroom apartment, holding on to a secret no one can prove. But sometimes, in collector forums and logging history threads, someone will post a photograph of a saw they found. Yellow housing, worn decals, no brand name visible. And someone else will reply, that's a Titan, and the thread goes quiet. Because everyone who knows, you don't talk about Titan. Not if you understand the industry, not if you understand how it was really built.